If everybody digs in and takes a, all or nothing mentality, my way or the highway, guess what you get? You get nothing.
The job of America's elected leaders is to get things done. The democratic process isn't always pretty and almost never leaves everyone happy. But the effectiveness of our government and America's stature as the world's dominant superpower rest on Congress's ability to find common ground on the issues, both foreign and domestic.
I think it's because Congress has given away its authority for decades. We spend so much money on things from the last wars.
Representative Jason Crow served in the United States Army's 75th Ranger Regiment. He's now the ranking member of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Intelligence and Special Operations. In his fourth consecutive term representing Colorado's 6th District, he's looking to return power to the hands of Congress and has found himself at the center of many of America's most controversial and important congressional matters, an area he's learned to navigate through his previous leadership of the Four Country Caucus, a bipartisan alliance of military veterans serving in the House of Representatives. Congressman Crow joined me to share just how he balances the most polarizing issues facing both sides of the aisle, including the investigation into the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the impeachment of President Donald Trump, and the inquiry into the pre-election assassination attempts. We also covered border security, the use of active duty military in the enforcement of the border, and how countering the cartels and the drug trade aren't a new mission for special operations. Watch, listen, or read our conversation from Congressman Crow's office. Don't miss our full coverage from Capitol Hill. Special thanks to the Four Country Caucus for setting up this series. Representative Crow, welcome to the Jedburgh podcast.
Fran, I'm glad to do this. This is way overdue. So finally, after listening to a bunch of your casts, finally able to be with you.
Well, last time I saw you was on the drop zone in Normandy.
It was.
We were trying to corral you in, and we had to let you go. We got to talk to Mike Waltz, which was awesome. But that was a cool experience.
That was so cool. Second time I had done that. The first time was in 2019 during the 75th anniversary. And then this past June, so I'm in the habit of, I think, every 5 years, all the big 5-year remembrances. So it was awesome. It was a bipartisan jump, as you know.
Yeah.
So I think we had 8 or 9 members of Congress, up from just 2, because Mike Waltz and I were the only ones who did it in 2019, and then it's kind of taken off since then.
Well, they're all trying to follow you because Rangers lead the way
All the way.
So they don't look as cool.
Is that the first time a Green Beret has ever said that?
No, because I went to Ranger school, unlike some of my
that's true.
Patriots. Yes,
that's
I
true.
went and graduated Ranger schools.
I thought, how many Green Berets don't have the tab?
If you are on the commissioned officer side,
almost
everybody.
Yeah.
I think I know like one person in my group who may not have had it. On the enlisted side, I think you end up having to go like at the senior levels if you haven't gone. So at the more senior levels, sergeant major and like the E8 level, you see a lot of it. At the junior level, you don't. And I always encouraged my guys to go because even though this is a program of the Green Beret Foundation, I will tell you that the best school in the Army is Ranger School.
It is. I agree with you. What class were you?
I was 105.
Okay. I'm 1002.
Okay.
So we're both Winter Rangers.
Yes.
Which matters.
It sucked.
It's really damn cold. Really damn cold. Georgia gets cold. So does Florida. No one believes us.
We were breaking ice in Alvesti.
Oh my God.
And it was snowing in the mountains.
Yeah.
And it was like 51 and 51 because below 50-50 water and air, you don't go in the water.
Yeah.
We were like 51-51.
Okay.
It was brutal.
I still get the shakes and get cold to my core every time somebody serves blueberry pancakes to me. And it's just like I can't do it. Just can't do it.
They're so disgusting.
They are disgusting. It's true.
Well, look, we got to talk about Congress. We got to talk about what's going on in the world. So special shout out to the Four Country Caucus.
Yeah.
They've invited us back. I guess we did a good job the first round when we were here before the election. We had a chance to sit down with a number of the members. They've invited us back. You serve in the 75th Ranger Regiment. You serve in the 82nd Airborne, multiple combat tours. You represent Colorado's 6th District, which is also important because when I was in 10th Group and 4th ID, I lived in Castle Rock.
Yeah.
So you have the district just above us.
I'm just above it. Like Castle Rock is just outside of my district by a couple of miles. So Beautiful spot.
Oh,
Beautiful area.
But you've got Littleton, Centennial,
Yep.
Aurora. I mean, that's where we had to go. And
Englewood, Wood, or Sheridan. So yeah, that whole like southern metro region is my district, which is a fascinating district because it's a military community because we have Buckley Space Force Base. There's over 10,000 both uniformed and non-uniformed folks that work at that. It's one of our largest intelligence centers in the world, actually. And then we have a big defense and aerospace industry. I have over 260 businesses that work in the defense, aviation, aerospace that employs tens of thousands of my constituents, over 70,000 veterans in the community. So it's a pretty fascinating place.
Hey, and you have the Denver Tech Center.
Yeah, Denver Tech Center, exactly.
Which is massive.
Yeah.
You serve on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence as well as the House Armed Services Committee, and you're the ranking member on the Subcommittee on Intelligence and Special Operations.
Yeah.
So you served in SOF. I served in SOF. This is a SOF-based podcast. We're going to start there.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
There are 100 veterans in Congress in the 119th Congress. It's the most in 8 Congresses. Veterans care about results, and they care about teamwork. I think that's one of the biggest lessons we take out of our military service. I did see a ranking for you that said you were the 15th most politically right Democrat. I don't know how they rank those. I don't know where that data comes from, but here's what we do know is that you've been extremely bipartisan in time in Congress, and it's been critically important to advocate for our veterans and for national security. As you look across this now large percentage, almost 20% of when you combine the two houses of Congress, of being a veteran, how do you expect the 119th Congress to come together and be led by veterans to form bipartisan community to bring America together?
Yeah, no, I'm so glad that you have highlighted the 4-country caucus. We actually generally call it the bipartisan Veterans Caucus because when we're out in their communities, we're like, I belong to the 4-country caucus, and they're like, well, which 4 countries are involved in that? Like, no, it's the bipartisan Veterans Caucus. So, but it's a great caucus. Last Congress, I was the Democrat co-chair. So we self-govern ourselves. We switch out. We kind of believe in rotating leadership and switching folks out. So it was me and Tony Gonzalez, Republican from South Texas.
He's been on.
Tony's been on. So, good guy, notwithstanding his Navy roots.
Yeah.
But I got to do it. I got to say it.
He was a cryptologist. I don't even know what that does.
I did not do as well. I clearly he did better on the ASVAB than I did.
All of us.
Because he took the test and like, cryptologists. I took the test and like, infantry.
Yeah, right. Go.
Right. Go. But we both turned out all right. But yeah, this is a great caucus. We actually started it in 2018. Many of us came in. It was like the largest influx of vets in that class of 2018 that we had in decades. And we came together and said, this place is not working. The culture is not working, right? You can talk all you want about rules and procedure, but like the culture is not working. And the culture being, if everybody digs in and takes a, all or nothing mentality, my way or the highway, guess what you get? You get nothing. Everybody gets nothing. And that's just not going to work. So we are not a caucus just of moderates. Like there's people on the right, there's people on the left, there's people in the middle. Our dedication is to finding common ground, whether it's 10%, 15%, 20%. And guess what? It works. We've passed, as you've pointed out, over 100 bills in the time we've been together doing the work. And it's phenomenal. It's a really great place. And we hope to set the example, the standard for the rest of the country and for Congress that this can work, right? That we can actually get back to having some discussion and frankly, reasserting congressional authority. And we'll probably get to that in a minute. Congress, I think, is at an all point, well, certainly in my lifetime, a weak point. And the presidency is at an all-time strong point. And I think the constitutional balance is out of whack right now.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because Congress has given away its authority for decades, right? Republican and Democratic Congresses have done it, and they've done it to Republican and Democratic presidents. We have constantly given away our authority, whether it's on the Immigration and Naturalization Act, whether it's on issues of war powers, right? It's Congress's role to debate and decide when to send us into war, right? That is Congress's role. And there are very narrow exceptions from the president can on his own use his authority to do so. That has gotten way out of whack, and Congress has allowed that, frankly, allowed it to happen. So, I'm of the view, and there's a fair amount of bipartisanship on this. It's time for Congress to reassert its control, to actually have debates, and to be held accountable. Right? Why do we have a 20-year war in Iraq and Afghanistan, both of which didn't end well, which is a longer conversation? It's because we stopped debating it. There was virtually no discussion, public discussion. It certainly wasn't a part of our elections, right? Because we were financing it with debt. We were doing it with an all-volunteer force. Folks, most folks, with the exception of a few, weren't feeling it. It wasn't a part of our political rhetoric. So my view is return that power back to Congress, hold us accountable. Every 2 years, we're up for election. We need to be voting on this stuff, and we need to be going back home and telling people why we're voting the way we are.
Yeah. Well, you brought up the war.
Mm-hmm.
The two wars, 20 years of the global war on terror. I think everybody who served in whatever component of the military all served admirably and did, I think, a great job in fighting for the nation. We could argue and debate, the root causes behind it, but, we have to give credit where it's due. But we also know that special operations carried a big component in both of those wars.
Huge.
And what is the job of special operations, I would say, outside of counterterrorism, is that they need to operate left of bang in the area that prevents the conflict. How do we work with partner nations and our allies to develop them and keep wars and conflict off of our soil?
Totally.
But also, we need to keep the term near in near peer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they play a big role of that.
Yeah, totally right.
As you sit on the Subcommittee on Intelligence and Special Operations as the ranking member, what do you see as the role of SOF over the next 5 or 10 years as we look at both threats in counterterrorism and in the near peer fight?
Yeah. Well, we spent, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, 2 decades mainly on a CT mission, right? And we restructured, we trained that way, our doctrine evolved around that. And now that's rapidly shifting back to the near peer threat, right? In great power competition. Number one, the CT threat is not gone, right? We still do have a CT threat. It's going to be a smaller percentage of the mission, and it needs to be, because we can't do all things. And we actually have capability and capacity of addressing the CT threat, not by having boots on the ground everywhere and having large scale troop formations in multiple countries. So we can address that. But the foreign internal defense mission, getting back to the roots of the Green Beret, as envisioned by John F. Kennedy when he created y'all, that is going to be so powerful because I believe really strongly that our greatest strength, other than our people, our incredible troops, is our partners, right? It is the envy. And you know why I know that? Because Russia and China desperately want what we have. They desperately want a NATO-like alliance, a Quad, an AUKUS, all of these alliance structures we built up, and they've tried really hard to build them and have largely failed. So we're the envy of the world in that, and the ability to, capacity build and use the force multiplying effect of our soft forces, and not necessarily be doing direct action ourselves, although there is a time and place for that, and that's not going to go away. It's going to be really powerful. That enabling mission.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've spoken with the commanders and the senior leaders across SOCOM is that they've been directed to reduce some forces.
Mm-hmm.
They've had money cut from the appropriations committee that has gone into SOF. That money, a lot of it has gone into the development of long-range strike capability, deep strike capability, and investment in the other components.
Yeah.
How do they continue to remain at the tip of the spear if the directive is, hey, you got to cut forces and you got to take money away?
Yeah, they can't, is the short answer. And I think it would be a huge mistake to do that. And we'll resist it. There's a lot of people who will resist that. Listen, we are nearing a $1 trillion defense budget, right? And you look at how that is spent right now, the proportion of that. And there's all sorts of discussion here in Washington about, plus ups, 5% increases. We need to increase the top line. And there isn't near enough discussion, although there's starting to be, about internal reform. because there is tens of billions, hundreds of billions over multiple years of wasted money, right? We are building systems now and procuring systems that will be completely ineffective on the battlefield of the future, right? We spend so much money on things from the last wars, the wars of 20 or 30 years ago. It's got to stop. It just has to stop. We're wasting taxpayer dollars. We're wasting time. Our adversaries aren't doing it. And listen, the fact that everyone loves to see these aircraft carriers. It's a show of strength. It makes good videos. They look great. But guess what? We spend billions of dollars, tens of billions, building and maintaining these things. And they can be knocked out with a $1 million cruise missile, right? It's insane. It's insane. So we have to be making hard decisions. And we have to be pushing DOD to respond to different incentives. And actually those incentives, those demand signals have to be sent by Congress, right? DOD is actually a rational organization. It responds to demand signals. It responds to the incentives that we push out, that we send it. And if we just keep on pumping money into that system, there's zero incentive for change. So let's stop. Let's say you've got to be able to pass an audit. You got to be able to show us how you're spending your money and what you're spending it on. And you got to show us how everything that we're doing right now will deliver results on the battlefield now and in the future. And I guarantee you that there are tremendous savings and efficiencies that we can then use for things like SOF, which have proven ability to have impact on the battlefield.
So you mentioned the term battlefield, and I think that when we look at what we've called the next battlefield, we could define that a million different ways. We always, I think, being GWAT veterans, we think about more of a land.
Yeah.
But the battlefield, as we look at our competition with China, can be across the dime spectrum of national power. Diplomatic, information, military, and economic power.
Right.
And I think that's really important to look at.
Right.
But one of the areas where
it's actually a great point. Actually, it's a huge point that definition is expanded. Right? Not just in a kinetic way, but, every electrical outlet, every computer terminal is a battlefield. Every satellite, right? It's all part of the battlefield. Our adversaries certainly are treating it that way, but also the so-called soft power, right? The aid, the diplomacy, all the things that prevent conflict and build our alliances.
Do we have I'm going to ask you because you kind of went there. Do we have the will, though? Because you brought up the electrical outlets, everything. We just had a great conversation with Representative Pfluger about this, where I asked him about denial of service attacks, because that's a huge threat. And I had a chance to sit down and interview the former Boeing chief security officer, and he said the biggest threat we have today is denial of service attacks. So, how do we build capability across the whole of government for something like, shutting off the water, shutting off the power, contaminating the air?
You mean defending against that?
It.
Yeah. Well, that's a leadership challenge, right? That's what leaders are supposed to be doing, right? And I need to reframe the discussion about, how do we build political will? You build political will by leading, right? That's in part our job, right? We have both a function of responding to the needs of our district. That is the primary function, right? Is to advocate for our districts and our constituents, to help, bring federal funding, to respond to their needs. But we also need to communicate as leaders the direction things are going. And we need to make the case that big shifts are necessary in how we're allocating resources, right? That is what leaders do. They don't simply respond. They got to be out front, and we have to be helping shape that debate, because we're not doing it enough. So when we talk about political will, it's not I don't view that as a passive term. That's an active term. And it's a term that if you're an elected official, you need to be engaged in helping to build that will, because it's dangerous, right? Our adversaries, China and others, they don't want a war with the United States, although they are building aggressive forces, and there's issues of Taiwan. I think they want a war potentially with others. What they want to do, they never want to go ship for ship, plane for plane. They want to completely cut off our ability to move, shoot, communicate, and do everything necessary before one bullet is ever fired. Right? So that is what they're trying to do. That's how they're investing their money. That's how they're building their infrastructure. And if we don't defend against that and build our defenses and build our resiliency against that, we'll be in real trouble.
Yeah. One of the areas that's been hotly discussed, I'd say, for, I don't know, the last 4 years, and certainly through the election cycle and over the last couple of weeks, is immigration. Your district came front and center on a lot of the immigration discussions because of the Venezuelan gangs that were reported to be operating across Aurora primarily. And now what we've seen are these mass deportations since the Trump administration has come into power. But some of this has also been tied to potential terrorist activity. And, do we know who's coming to the country? What's your assessment of, the border situation right now and how it's affected your district? And I know that you were vocal about not using Buckley Space,
Right.
I just call it Buckley Air Force Base.
Buckley Space Force Base, yeah.
The Space Force Base. It's
Yeah.
hard to get that term
Yeah.
down. But not using that for mass deportation. But you've also been very vocal about, hey, look, if they're here illegal, they got to go.
Yeah. Well, I'm a national security Democrat. I'm a public safety Democrat. I believe in public safety and law and order. And if someone is committing violent crime in our community or is a danger to our community, they have no place in our community, and they have no place in Colorado. Right. And I actually don't know of anybody, nor have I spoken to anybody that says, yeah, if there's a violent offender, we shouldn't sweep them up and detain them. And if they don't have status, deport them, get them out. Right. That is not up for debate in my view. But that's also not what we're talking about when we're talking about mass deportation. So I will loop back to that. I have one of the most diverse districts in the nation. Right, nearly 20% of my constituents were born outside of the United States. I have over 130 languages spoken in my public school system. And these are folks from all over, right? And they're business owners. They work in our industries. They're a fundamental part of our economy and our workforce. They're our neighbors. They're our friends, right? And we all live within a fundamentally broken immigration system, broken in every single way. Right, we talk about border security, and that consumes a lot of the discussion, and I'm concerned about it too. Like, we need border security. We do not have border security. The border needs to be secure. And there's smart ways of doing that effectively, and there's dumb ways of doing that. I'm a big fan of George Patton. And
who isn't?
Who isn't? Right? And like one of Patton's famous quotes was, fixed fortifications are monuments to the stupidity of man. Right? Because he knows in history that, no fortress, no wall, whether you're talking about Hadrian's Wall or the Maginot Line, nothing can't be overcome. Yeah. Right? You can't go up, over, around something, right? And you pour all these money into things. So what we know is that there are ways with technology, with surveillance, with ISR, with personnel of actually securing border and space. Right? So let's have a discussion about how to do that. Right? Because I'm concerned about terrorism too. That's one. Two, there has to be a pathway to citizenship for folks who are living peacefully within our community, which is the vast majority, that own businesses, own homes, that are fundamental to our economy, that are following the rules and want to normalize their status. Right? That's actually good for all of us. Right? So let's have that discussion. And we actually had the ability to do that. With a bipartisan deal that we heavily negotiated last Congress that was killed by the president, by President Trump. So that's two. And three is, because I have such a diverse community, very few people are talking about the visa issue, right? There is talent. People still want to live in the United States because we have great quality of life. We're still the envy of the world. We have wonderful innovation. The American dream is something that people around the world still talk about. People want to come, smart, educated, skilled folks. They literally can't, right? They apply for a visa and it's 10, 15, 20-year wait times. That is destroying our economy, and it's holding us back. I go to small businesses all the time. I do business visits almost every time I'm in Colorado. And I always ask them the same question. I say, what is your number one problem with your business? And across the board, they always say workforce. I can't find enough people to grow my business and to make more money and to expand. So why don't we have an actual discussion about how we normalize status for folks, how we fix our visa system, how we secure our border, and we do so in a humane way that'll be good for our community and good for our families. So, I mean, that requires the last piece.
Yeah.
The last piece is that requires that we actually have a discussion about what is and isn't happening, right? And all the focus on Aurora and these mass gang takeovers. Listen, I live in Aurora. It's my home, right? I spend time talking with a local elected leaders, with the federal law enforcement, with the head of the FBI, with all the local police. I have a good sense for what's happening and what's not. And I can tell you that, no transnational gangs are taking over Aurora. It's just not true. Right now, are there issues that need to be addressed? And is federal law enforcement working with others to address it? Yes. And do I support that? Yes. But we need to have fact-based discussions.
Yeah. When we look at our active duty military force, one of the things that's come into the immigration discussion is the deployment of active duty down to the border. The other piece from a special operations discussion that's happened is the president has said, well, we can deploy special operations to fight narco-terrorism. If we say the cartels, terrorist organizations, which they've done in the last couple of weeks, which isn't actually out of the ordinary. If we go back to the Colombia cartels, we deployed the force down there. And I think Rangers.
So much of what we talk about, Tom Clancy talked about decades.
Exactly. There's books. I mean, killing Pablo was a real story.
Yes.
But what's your opinion on using the active duty component, whether it be special operations to go after the cartels or the deployment of the border to actually help fortify that?
Well, first of all, this goes to my earlier point about needing to have a transparent debate and understanding that certain things are classified and need to be kept, secret for operational security reasons. But there's actually ways of us doing oversight and Congress being involved in that. I sit on the Intelligence Committee, and over 95% of what we do is in a SCIF. It's all classified, right? So if what we want to do is use military for foreign, counterterrorism, counter narco trafficking operations, there is some precedent for that. But I want to see Congress involved. Congress needs to be involved constitutionally, legally, right? This is something that no president should do on their own, whether they're a Republican or Democrat. The elected representatives that constitutionally have the role of deciding when to send our people proactively into conflict need to be engaged. And so far, we're not engaged. So that's fundamental to me. That's what needs to happen. And then we can have a discussion about what's appropriate use of our military and what's tied to our national security and what's not. Because we also have to look at the broader picture, right? We simply cannot do everything everywhere. And I would like to, but we have finite resources. The world is a dangerous place, and people are making decisions all the time about how to allocate our resources and our forces and our money, given what are the biggest conflicts and what are the biggest threats. So we need to have that conversation.
I got one more question for you, and this is going to be hard because I know you got a lot of things to do, and it's not easy leading Colorado and leading this country, but you are a Ranger, so you're going to lead from the front. I want to ask you about, we talked a little bit about bipartisanship and we talked about teamwork, but I got to ask you, how do you do it? Because I think that's what the tangible discussion has to be. It's easy to say, we're going to get along, but I want to throw something out here that I think is really important about you. In President Trump's first term, you led the impeachment inquiry. However, fast forward to several months ago, when President Trump was almost assassinated, you were one of the first ones to raise your hand and say, I will lead this investigation. And so here you have, yourself, who on one end of the spectrum said, we got to get rid of this guy. And on the other side said, hey, I got to stand up for this situation here, and we got to figure out what happened.
Right.
How do you build consensus? And how do you rally people to come to the table and have the discussions that you've gone back to in this conversation, brought on multiple times about sitting down and having a discussion? And I'll throw one more thing out to you and then I'll turn it over. But Patrick Murphy, former congressman and Secretary of the Army, sat down with me a couple of years ago, and he has a great quote that I use all the time. He said that you can disagree, but you cannot be disagreeable. How do you do that?
Well, I mean, that is the ultimate challenge right now, and your examples are right. I mean, first of all, I have this knack for being pulled into these big assignments. Like, I'm just sitting around minding my own business, having a coffee.
Those are the best
and
stories.
I get the call, I get the knock on the door, and they're like, "Do you want to be like an impeachment manager? Or do you want to help lead the attempted assassination task force? Do you want to whatever the case might be, lead the effort to do the investigation into Afghanistan. So listen, I'm here to serve. I don't always know what that looks like. I will answer the call when it comes, if it's appropriate. I try to call balls and strikes, right? So I have, a lot of issues with the policies of this administration. But if there are things that I can get behind, I'm not going to just burn the entire house down. Because, again, this goes back to my earlier comment. If you take the all or nothing mentality, if that's what everybody does, then everybody gets nothing. And that's just not going to work, right? So my simple approach is relationships, right? If you literally just sit down and talk to somebody, grab a drink after work, grab a dinner with them, take a CODEL, one of these congressional delegation trips overseas to visit our troops.
Jump out of an airplane.
Jump out of a plane, right? Like, you actually get to know the person, and you get to know their family and their spouse and what drives them. And you realize that, listen, the vast majority of people are not evil. They're not trying to destroy your way of life. They have deep-seated differences in views. And that's not to say I'm not going to fight ardently for my beliefs and to protect my constituents, because I will. That's not what I'm saying. Because I will fight if I need to. But I'm not going to approach something in any conversation at the outset and say, your motivations are bad or you hate America. Because the second you do that, you're done, right? The second you go to somebody and say, you're evil, or you're, existential threat to me, or you hate America, or whatever the case might be, there's no place to go, right? The conversation is essentially over. And I'm one of the most bipartisan members of Congress. At one point I was ranked 11 out of 435 last Congress, and 75% of the bills that I introduce with the Republican co-lead, because I mean it. And some very conservative folks co-sponsor and work with me on bills because I know them and they trust me, and they know that I wouldn't ask them to do something that I wouldn't do myself, or if they came to me that I also wouldn't do, right? So it's as simple as that. It's relationships and getting to know your neighbor and your friend.
Yeah. In the Special Forces, we call it a warrior diplomat.
Yeah.
So, which is awesome to see from a Ranger.
Yeah. Well, that we can cross our own lines in the service. So
sometimes you don't need to blow the door. You could just turn the handle and open it up and ask if anyone's inside.
Sometimes you can. It's we have lessons to learn from each other, friend.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me. It's been an honor to plan this for a while and really kind of throw the difficult questions at you, because Congress is there, as you've mentioned, to get things done.
Yeah.
And I think that the job of a congressman, in all levels, in both the House and the Senate, is to find a way to get the result, because that's what matters. Results. The American people want results. How you get there?
Well, they want it because they deserve it, right? Like that is our job, right? It's not just what they want; it's what they deserve and what we owe to them, right? And I always say that the problem of legislating, the challenge of it, is the Goldilocks challenge, right? You need that porridge just right, not too hot, not too cold. And a lot of these issues are not easy issues. They have unintended consequences. So that's our job.
Yeah. And I tell people all the time in leadership seminars that I give is, as a leader, it doesn't matter how you feel as long as your team achieved the result that you want.
That's right. Yeah, my personal feelings are largely irrelevant here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
all right. Thanks, Fran. Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
American Jedburghs went on to form the foundation of the United States Special Forces and the Special Activities Directorate of the Central Intelligence Agency. Thanks for listening to the Jedburgh Podcast, an official program of the Green Beret Foundation. I'm your creator and host, Fran Racioppi. Join us next week for a new episode on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube for full episodes, highlights, and other long and short form content. If you like what you heard, give us a like and leave a review. Follow the Jedburgh Podcast and the Green Beret Foundation on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, X, or Threads. Send your comments and inquiries to Fran@jedburghpodcast.com. As former members of Special Operations Forces, the Jedburgh Media Channel and the Green Beret Foundation remain committed to supporting all generations of U.S. Army Special Forces and their families. Thanks for joining us on this episode. How you prepare today determines success tomorrow.